They thought I would bow my head and stay silent after saving the company from a $51 million contract loss. But they forgot about the small clause I had inserted into the agreement from day one. I wasn't asking for power. I was only asking for justice. And when they tried to strip away my rights, I pulled the plug literally. Did they lose $51 million? No. They lost the very foundation their company was standing on. It was never my intention to bring down a corporate empire. I'm not the vengeful type. At least I wasn't until they forced my hand. My name is Emily Foster. And for 6 years, I was the director of vendor strategy at Ironvale Partners, a financial consulting firm headquartered in Denver, Colorado. I'm 38 years old, with a reputation for being logical, honest, and consistent. My colleagues used to joke that I could smell a bad contract from 3 floors away. I remember the day I was hired. Ironvale was drowning in poorly negotiated vendor agreements, bleeding money through loopholes large enough to drive trucks through. The CEO at the time, Martin Reynolds, had the wisdom to recognize they needed someone who understood the intricate dance of corporate contracts. "Emily," he said during my final interview, "we've made some costly mistakes. I need someone who won't be intimidated by aggressive salespeople or fancy PowerPoints. I need someone who sees the numbers behind the smiles." I accepted the job because I recognized a challenge worth taking. 6 months in, I realized the scope of their problems was far worse than anyone had admitted. They were hemorrhaging millions on software they weren't using, paying for services that were never delivered, and accepting terms that would make any reasonable business person cringe. The first 2 years were an uphill battle. I overhauled their entire vendor management approach, creating detailed documentation of every past mistake and instituting new protocols that sometimes made me the least popular person in budget meetings. But Martin supported me, and gradually, people began to see the value. By my 3rd year, I had developed what would become my legacy at Ironvale, a proprietary system I named Sentry, Supplier Evaluation and Risk Tracking Yield. It wasn't just software. It was a comprehensive methodology for evaluating vendors, tracking performance metrics, predicting cost overruns, and identifying hidden contract traps. Sentry wasn't just a tool. It became Ironvale's competitive advantage. While our competitors were getting blindsided by unexpected cost escalations, we were identifying risks before signing on the dotted line. The system saved Ironvale millions in its first year alone. My proudest moment came during the now infamous global tech negotiation. They were offering a SaaS platform that, on paper, seemed revolutionary. The sales team was charming, the demos flawless, and most of our executive team was ready to sign a 5-year, $51 million contract. But Sentry flagged irregularities. The maintenance costs were buried in complex formulas that would have resulted in exponential increases by year 3. Their performance data was cherry-picked from ideal test environments that didn't reflect real-world usage. And most damning, their reference clients were actually sister companies under the same corporate umbrella. When I presented my findings, the room fell silent. The global tech representatives tried to dismiss my concerns as technical misunderstandings, but the evidence was irrefutable. We walked away from the deal, and 6 months later, news broke that 3 of Global Tech's major clients were suing them for misrepresentation. That victory earned me formal recognition from the board and substantial influence within Ironvale. But it also created enemies. Several executives had championed the Global Tech deal, including our then VP of Sales, who lost a significant performance bonus when it fell through. While they couldn't argue with the results, they resented my growing authority. For the next 2 years, I expanded Sentry's capabilities, adding predictive analytics and a vendor relationship module that tracked every interaction, promise, and deviation. The system became so integral to Ironvale's operations that we included it in our pitch materials to clients as evidence of our rigorous approach to financial management. What no one realized, or perhaps they simply forgot, was that I had protected myself from the beginning. When Martin Reynolds asked me to build this system, I insisted on a clause in my employment agreement that would prove prophetic. If my position was substantially altered without my consent after 5 years of service, I would be entitled to leave with a severance package equal to 3% of the documented savings Sentry had generated for the company. At the time, it seemed like reasonable protection for intellectual property I was developing. I never imagined I would need to invoke it. But then Martin retired, and everything changed. The new CEO, Rebecca Williams, came with ambitious growth targets. She brought in Logan Barrett as the new COO, a man with a reputation for aggressive expansion strategies at his previous companies. Logan was tall, impeccably dressed, and spoke with the confident certainty that often masks a shallow understanding of complex systems. Our first meeting should have been a warning. He glanced at my presentation on vendor risk management for less than a minute before interrupting. This is all very thorough, Emily. But I think we need to shift our approach. Growth requires speed, and sometimes speed means accepting calculated risks. I maintained my professional composure. With respect, Mr. Barrett, what you call calculated risks, I call preventable losses. Sentry has saved Ironvale more than, yes. He waved dismissively. I've seen the numbers. Impressive historical performance. But the market is changing. We need to be more agile, more willing to seize opportunities before our competitors. Over the next few months, Logan systematically undermined my authority. He would approve vendor contracts without proper Sentry evaluation, claiming strategic urgency. When those decisions inevitably created problems, he would task others with finding solutions, excluding me from meetings where my expertise was most needed. The final blow came on a Tuesday morning. I was called into Rebecca's office to find Logan already seated there, a folder on his lap and an expression of rehearsed concern on his face. Emily, Rebecca began, we've been reviewing our organizational structure in light of our new growth initiatives. I knew what was coming, but let her continue. Logan has proposed some changes that we believe will better align our vendor strategy with our overall corporate direction. Logan leaned forward. We're creating a new strategic partnerships division that will absorb most of your current responsibilities. We'd like you to transition to a role as senior technical advisor, reporting to Jason Mercer, who will head the new division. Jason Mercer was 32, had been with the company for less than a year, and had zero experience in vendor management. What he did have was a business school connection to Logan and a willingness to follow orders without question. This isn't a demotion, Logan added quickly. It's a realignment that lets you focus on what you do best, the technical aspects of vendor evaluation while freeing you from administrative burdens. The translation was clear. They wanted to keep Sentry but remove me from any decision-making authority. I would become a technical operator, pushing buttons on the system I built while Jason and Logan made the real decisions. I see, I said carefully. And what happens to my team? They'll report to Jason now, Rebecca said. But you'll still work closely with them on technical matters. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. When would this transition take effect? We're announcing organizational changes next Monday, Logan said. We'd like you to help with a smooth handover over the next 2 weeks. I asked for time to consider the proposal, which they granted with visible relief. They probably expected me to negotiate for a better title or perhaps a compensation increase to soothe my wounded pride. They had no idea what was coming. Back in my office, I closed the door and pulled out my employment contract. The clause was still there, exactly as I remembered it. After 5 years of service, a milestone I had passed 7 months earlier, any substantial change to my position without my consent would trigger severance terms. And those terms were specific 3% of the documented savings attributed to systems I had developed, calculated based on internal records and vendor comparison analyses. I spent the rest of the day accessing and downloading all the relevant documentation. Every report, every analysis, every email where my system had identified a risk that prevented a loss. 6 years of meticulous record-keeping was about to pay off. The next morning, I requested a meeting with Rebecca and Logan. They seemed pleased, probably assuming I'd come to terms with their decision. Thank you for meeting with me, I began. I've given your proposal careful consideration, and I have to decline the new position. Logan frowned. Emily, I don't think you understand. This restructuring is happening. We're offering you a path forward with the company. I smiled. I understand perfectly. And according to Section 12.4 of my employment agreement, this restructuring triggers certain provisions. I slid copies of the relevant contract pages across the table. Rebecca picked hers up immediately, eyes narrowing as she read. Logan ignored his, maintaining eye contact with me instead. Given the substantial change to my role without my consent, I'm exercising my right to terminate my employment with severance equal to 3% of documented savings attributed to Sentry and related systems I've developed. Now Logan reached for the contract, scanning it quickly. This is absurd. This clause couldn't possibly have been approved. It was, Rebecca said quietly. Martin signed it. I remember the discussion now. She looked up at me. But surely there's room for negotiation here. Emily, you've been valuable to Ironvale. We want you to stay. I've calculated the severance amount based on our internal records, I continued, sliding another document across the table. The total comes to approximately $4.7 million after taxes. Logan's face flushed red. This is extortion. We won't pay this. Rebecca shot him a warning glance. What Logan means is that this figure seems high. We'd need to review the calculations. Of course, I replied. All the supporting documentation is included, but I should mention that the Global Tech contract alone accounts for over half of this amount, and those savings are extensively documented in board presentations and financial reports. The room fell silent as the magnitude of the situation sank in. There is an alternative, I finally said. I'm willing to remain with Ironvale under my current title and responsibilities, with complete authority over Sentry implementation and vendor selection protocols. Logan scoffed. So you're threatening to leave unless we give you exactly what you want. That's not how this works. It's not a threat, Mr. Barrett, it's a choice. You can honor my existing role and authority. Or you can proceed with your restructuring and honor the contract terms Martin and I agreed to years ago. Rebecca was silent, clearly calculating the financial and legal implications. We'll need to discuss this privately, she finally said. I nodded and stood to leave. I'll expect your decision by the end of the week. For the next 3 days, an uneasy silence hung over the executive floor. I continued my work as usual, while Logan gathered allies and hurried, closed-door meetings. I noticed Jason Mercer being called into multiple sessions with the legal team, emerging each time looking increasingly uncomfortable. On Friday afternoon, Rebecca called me into her office. Logan was notably absent. We've reviewed your contract and the supporting documentation, she began. While we believe there's room for interpretation on some of the savings calculations, we acknowledge the substantial value you've brought to Ironvale. She slid a counter-proposal across the desk. We're prepared to maintain your director-level status. With a modified reporting structure, you would report jointly to Logan and me, with primary authority over Sentry implementation but shared decision-making on final vendor selection. I reviewed the document carefully. The shared decision-making clause effectively gave Logan veto power over any vendor decision, rendering my authority meaningless. This doesn't maintain my current level of authority, I said. It actually diminishes it significantly. Rebecca sighed. Emily, we need to move forward with our new strategic direction. Logan feels strongly that vendor selection needs to align with our growth initiatives. Then Logan should learn how Sentry works instead of trying to sideline the person who built it. Her expression hardened. We've made what we feel is a reasonable accommodation. I hope you'll reconsider your position. I stood up. My position was clear: full authority over Sentry and vendor selection, or severance as outlined in my contract. Then I guess we're at an impasse, she said. I guess we are. The following Monday, the reorganization was announced. My name appeared on the org chart as Senior Technical Advisor under Jason Mercer's new Strategic Partnerships Division. My team was notified they would now report to Jason, effective immediately. I waited until 10 a.m., when I knew the executive team would be in their weekly strategy meeting, Then I executed the contingency plan I'd prepared years ago, but hoped never to use. When I built Sentry, I had included a little-known security feature. While the system appeared to run on Iron Veil's servers, the core algorithmic engine and master database were actually housed on a secure cloud platform under my personal ownership. It was registered as my intellectual property, licensed to Iron Veil as part of my employment agreement, the very agreement they had just violated. With a series of commands, I revoked all administrative access to Sentry except my own, then initiated a systematic backup and lockdown protocol. Within minutes, every user at Iron Veil received an automated message. Sentry system access temporarily suspended pending licensing verification. Please contact system administrator for assistance. I packed my personal belongings, left my company laptop and badge on my desk, and walked out of Iron Veil Partners for the last time. My phone started ringing before I reached my car. Jason Mercer, then the IT director, then Rebecca herself. I silenced each call, knowing exactly what was happening inside the building. Iron Veil was in the final stages of negotiating a major service contract with Pinnacle Solutions, a vendor that had been flagged in Sentry for aggressive pricing tactics. Without access to our vendor history and risk assessment data, Iron Veil's negotiating team was suddenly flying blind. By evening, rumors were circulating on industry forums about unusual activity at Iron Veil. One of my former team members texted, "What did you do? Everyone's losing their minds here." I didn't respond. There was nothing to say that wouldn't be used against me later. The next morning, a legal letter arrived by courier, demanding immediate restoration of Sentry access and threatening legal action for intellectual property theft and corporate sabotage. My lawyer, whom I had briefed weeks earlier as a precaution, responded with a detailed explanation of my intellectual property rights, the license terms clearly outlined in my employment agreement, and a counter-demand for the severance payment now triggered by their breach of contract. The standoff lasted 3 days. Pinnacle Solutions, sensing Iron Veil's vulnerability, increased their proposed rates by 22% and inserted new minimum commitment clauses that would have been immediately flagged by Sentry as high risk. On the 4th day, Rebecca called me directly. "This has gone far enough," she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "You've made your point." "I'm not trying to make a point," I replied calmly. "I'm enforcing the terms of an agreement Iron Veil chose to violate. The board has authorized me to settle this matter," she continued as if I hadn't spoken. "We'll honor the severance terms as calculated in your documentation. All $4.7 million. A pause. Yes. Wednesdays, I'll have my lawyer prepare the necessary paperwork. And Sentry access will be restored immediately upon signing. It will be restored when the funds clear my account," I corrected. "And I'll provide a 6-month license at no additional cost, along with transition documentation for whoever will manage it going forward." She agreed, though I could hear the defeat in her voice. 24 hours later, the settlement agreement was signed. 3 days after that, $4.7 million was transferred to my account. And as promised, I restored Iron Veil's access to Sentry. What I didn't tell them was that I had already begun building something better, with financial security and a non-compete agreement that only prevented me from working with Iron Veil's existing clients. I spent the next 6 months developing an enhanced version of my vendor management system. I incorporated everything I had learned at Iron Veil, plus new innovations in predictive analytics and contract automation. When I was ready, I launched Echelon Risk Advisory, a specialized consulting firm focused exclusively on helping companies navigate complex vendor relationships and avoid predatory contract terms. My first client came from an unexpected source, Pinnacle Solutions, the same company that had tried to take advantage of Iron Veil's sudden vulnerability, approached me after losing several major contracts to competitors. Their VP of sales, a woman named Diana Chen, was refreshingly direct. "We've been too aggressive with our terms, and it's starting to hurt us. We need someone who understands both sides of the table to help us create more sustainable client relationships." The irony wasn't lost on me, but I took the contract, $600,000 for a 6-month engagement. Within that time frame, I helped them restructure their entire approach to enterprise clients, creating transparent pricing models and contract terms that built trust instead of traps. Word spread quickly. Small and mid-sized companies that had been pressured into unfavorable vendor agreements sought out Echelon for guidance. We grew from a one-person operation to a team of 15 specialized consultants within our first year. I made a point of never directly competing with Ironvale, though I heard through industry channels that they were struggling without proper implementation of Sentry. The 6-month license I provided had expired, and while they had the system, they lacked the expertise to maintain and evolve it. 14 months after my departure, news broke that Ironvale had signed a disastrous contract with a cloud services provider, resulting in approximately $12 million in unexpected costs due to overlooked escalation clauses, exactly the kind of trap Sentry would have identified. A week later, Logan Barrett was quietly removed from his position. 2 days after that, I received a call from Rebecca. "I won't waste your time with small talk," she began. "We've made mistakes, Emily. Significant ones." "I'm sorry to hear that," I replied, genuinely meaning it. Despite everything, I had invested 6 years of my life in Ironvale and still respected many of the people there. "We'd like to engage Echelon as an independent consultant to help us rebuild our vendor management protocols." I considered it briefly. "I appreciate the offer, Rebecca, but I think there would be too much history for that relationship to be productive." "I understand," she said, sounding unsurprised. "For what it's worth, I should have handled things differently. We all should have." "Yes," I agreed. "You should have." After ending the call, I looked around my new office, the headquarters of Echelon Risk Advisory, occupying the top floor of a sleek building in downtown Denver. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could actually see the Ironvale building several blocks away. 1 year after that conversation with Rebecca, Echelon received the Regional Impact Award for the most influential independent consulting firm in the Western United States. Our client list had grown to include over 60 companies, ranging from tech startups to established manufacturing firms. The plaque sat on my desk, beside a framed copy of the contract clause that had changed everything. It served as a daily reminder that preparation and foresight were as important in business as they were in the vendor relationships I helped navigate. They thought I would bow my head and stay silent. They forgot that I had written the clause that made leaving more valuable than staying. In the end, I didn't just save myself, I created something better, something truly mine, where my expertise was valued rather than marginalized. As I sat in my office that evening, I received an email notification about an industry publication's annual list of game changers. Scrolling through, I smiled when I saw my name among those recognized for transforming how businesses approach vendor relationships. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had never sought power or recognition, just the respect my work deserved. In losing what I had built at Ironvale, I found something far more valuable: the freedom to build something even better, on my own terms. Sometimes, pulling the plug isn't an ending, it's just the beginning of something new. I often think about that fateful meeting when Logan and Rebecca tried to demote me. Had they simply recognized my value and incorporated me into their growth strategy instead of trying to sideline me, things might have turned out very differently. Ironvale might still be a market leader. Sentry might have evolved into something even more powerful under their umbrella. Instead, their short-sighted power play cost them millions, damaged their reputation, and gave birth to a competitor they never anticipated. It wasn't revenge that drove me. It was self-preservation and a deep belief in fairness. I had protected myself legally from the beginning because I understood how quickly corporate priorities could shift. When they violated our agreement, I simply enforced the terms we had all agreed to. The morning after receiving that industry recognition, I arrived at the office early to find Diana Chen, now Pinnacle's Chief Revenue Officer, waiting in our reception area. "I hope you don't mind the surprise visit," she said, rising to shake my hand. "I was in town for a conference and wanted to congratulate you in person. The award is well-deserved." Over coffee in my office, she shared something interesting. "You know, your former employer approached us recently. They're struggling with vendor management again. Are they? I kept my tone neutral. She nodded. They've gone through 3 different systems since Sentry. Nothing seems to work for them the way your system did. She hesitated. They asked if we knew whether you might reconsider consulting for them. I raised an eyebrow. They used you as an intermediary. Unofficially, I think Rebecca's pride is still wounded. I considered this information. My answer hasn't changed. Echelon has plenty of clients who value what we offer. Diana smiled. That's what I told them you'd say. She glanced around my office. You've built something impressive here. Emily. Something authentic. After she left, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this point. 6 years at Ironvale had taught me everything about corporate politics, risk management, and self-protection. But it was the 14 months since leaving that had taught me the most important lesson: true success comes not from fitting into someone else's vision, but from having the courage to pursue your own. I opened my laptop and began working on a new project, a comprehensive guide for professionals on protecting their intellectual property and negotiating fair employment terms. If my experience could help others avoid similar situations or navigate them successfully, perhaps some greater good could come from it all. As I typed, I glanced occasionally at the Ironvale building visible through my window. I felt no anger anymore, just a quiet satisfaction that justice had ultimately prevailed. They had tried to diminish my contribution and take control of my creation. Instead, they had inadvertently launched me into a position of greater influence and success than I might ever have achieved within their walls. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's simply moving forward and thriving on your own terms. That afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor. Martin Reynolds, Ironvale's former CEO, the man who had hired me and approved that fateful contract clause, stood in our reception area. Emily, he said warmly as I approached. It's good to see you. We settled in my office, and he looked around appreciatively. Quite a change from your cubicle at Ironvale, isn't it? I smiled. Life has taken some unexpected turns. Not entirely unexpected, he countered. At least not to me. I always knew you were capable of something like this. It's why I approved that clause in your contract. I suspected someday you might need the freedom to pursue your own path. This surprised me. You anticipated this outcome. He shrugged. Not specifically, but I recognized your potential and your integrity. Those 2 qualities often create friction in corporate environments. He paused. I heard about what happened with Logan and Rebecca. They mishandled the situation badly. They did, I agreed simply. Well, their loss is clearly the market's gain. Echelon is doing important work. He leaned forward. Actually, that's partly why I'm here. I've joined the board of Westridge Financial. They're looking for precisely the kind of vendor management expertise you provide. By the end of our meeting, Echelon had secured another major client, and I had reconnected with the one executive from Ironvale who had truly valued my contribution. As Martin was leaving, he paused at the door. You know, I keep a close eye on Ironvale's stock performance out of habit. It's down 18% since you left. He smiled. Just thought you might find that interesting. I didn't respond, but after he left, I couldn't help checking the numbers myself. He was right. While Ironvale struggled, Echelon was flourishing. Our revenue had doubled quarter over quarter since launch, and we were now turning away clients to maintain our quality standards. 2 years after leaving Ironvale, I was invited to give the keynote address at the National Vendor Management Association's annual conference. Standing at the podium, looking out at hundreds of professionals eager to learn from my experience, I reflected on the journey that had brought me there. The most expensive mistake companies make, I told the audience, is undervaluing the very expertise they hire to protect them. When organizations prioritize politics over performance, when they sideline the voices raising legitimate concerns in favor of those promising easier paths, they inevitably pay a much higher price down the road. From the back of the room, I noticed a familiar face, Rebecca Williams, sitting alone, listening intently. Our eyes met briefly, and she gave a small, acknowledging nod. After the speech, she approached me during the reception. "That was insightful," she said. "You always did have a talent for identifying the core issues." "Thank you," I replied, unsure of her intentions. "Iron Veil is selling," she said quietly. "The board approved it yesterday. A private equity firm is acquiring us at a significant discount to our valuation when you were still with us." I wasn't sure how to respond. "I'm sorry to hear that." She shook her head. "Don't be. It's the natural consequence of poor decisions. I wanted you to hear it from me before the news breaks." She hesitated. "For what it's worth, Logan's strategic direction was a disaster. I should have listened to you." "It's water under the bridge now," I said. "Is it?" She looked at me thoughtfully. "The PE firm plans to break up Iron Veil's business units. The vendor strategy division might be available as a separate acquisition." Now I understood why she was here. "Are you suggesting Echelon should consider acquiring it?" A faint smile crossed her face. "It would be a certain kind of poetry, wouldn't it? You could rebuild what you started, with complete control this time." The idea was unexpectedly tempting. With Iron Veil's client relationships and Echelon's expertise, we could create something truly dominant in the market. "I'll think about it," I told her, not committing either way. After Rebecca left, I found a quiet corner and called Martin Reynolds, who had become something of a mentor since reconnecting. "It's an interesting proposition," he said after I explained. "But ask yourself this: do you want to rebuild the past, or keep creating the future?" His question stayed with me for days. Ultimately, I decided against pursuing Iron Veil's vendor strategy division. Echelon was thriving on its own merits, with a culture and approach I had carefully crafted. Absorbing a piece of Iron Veil might bring clients and revenue, but it would also import the very corporate dynamics I had fought to escape. Instead, I reached out to several key people from my former team at Iron Veil, offering them positions at Echelon. Most accepted, eager to reunite with the system and leadership they had respected. 3 years after walking out of Iron Veil for the last time, I stood in Echelon's expanded offices, now occupying 3 floors of our building, with a team of 50 specialists and a client list that included some of the most respected names in business. The plaque from our first industry award had been joined by several others. The framed contract clause still sat on my desk, though I rarely looked at it anymore. It had served its purpose, launching me on a path I might otherwise never have taken. That evening, as I was preparing to leave for the day, my assistant handed me a small package that had been delivered. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note from Jason Mercer, the man who had been set to become my boss in Logan's reorganization. "Emily." The note read, "With Iron Veil's acquisition finalized, I thought you should have this. It's the final version of Sentry as it existed when you left. No one ever fully understood how to maintain it properly. And the system degraded over time. Perhaps in your hands, it might live again. Regardless, it belongs with its creator." I plugged the drive into my computer and found a complete backup of Sentry as I had built it, along with all the historical data it had accumulated. It was like encountering an old friend, one I had outgrown but still remembered fondly. After making a secure copy for my archives, I created a new directory in Echelon's development environment and uploaded the core Sentry code. Not to use it as it was, we had built far more advanced systems since then, but to honor where we had started. That night, as I drove home, I reflected on everything that had transpired since that fateful meeting with Logan and Rebecca. Their attempt to diminish my role had inadvertently set me free to create something far more meaningful than I would have achieved remaining at Iron Veil. They thought I would bow my head and stay silent. They forgot that I had written the clause that made leaving more valuable than staying. In pulling the plug, I hadn't just protected myself, I had launched a new chapter that exceeded all expectations, including my own. Sometimes the greatest opportunities come disguised as setbacks. Sometimes pulling the plug isn't an ending, but the beginning of something far better than you ever imagined. As I parked in front of my home, my phone buzzed with a notification. Opening it, I saw that Echelon had just been named to The Forbes list of most innovative companies, a recognition Iron Veil had chased unsuccessfully for years. I smiled as I turned off the engine. Justice, it seemed, had a poetry all its own.